In the theater of power, deception is not the exception, it is the rule. The manipulator does not arrive at your door with a dagger in hand, for that would be too obvious, too crude. Instead, they cloak themselves in a mask so polished, so convincing, that even the most vigilant minds can be ensnared. Their true strength lies not in force, but in illusion. They understand that men are not governed by reason alone, but by appearances, emotions, and desires. And so, they shape their mask accordingly. One will approach you with honeyed words, flattering your achievements, whispering that you are destined for greatness. Another will present themselves as a victim, drowning in sorrow, desperate for your aid, subtly chaining your conscience to their service. And yet another will appear as the humble ally, a quiet servant, asking for nothing, while in truth calculating how much influence your favor could yield. These masks vary, but the intent beneath them never changes. It is always the pursuit of control, of bending your will to theirs. Consider for a moment the way a snake hunts. It does not roar like a lion or charge like a bull. Instead, it slithers silently, its venom hidden until it strikes. The manipulator is no different. They rarely reveal themselves openly. They prefer to seduce the mind before tightening their grip around the soul. This is why so many fall prey. They mistake charm for loyalty, kindness for sincerity, and subtle praise for respect. Yet if you wish to outsmart them, you must train yourself to pierce through appearances, to look past the surface and into the shadows where true intentions are concealed. How is this done? Through observation. The manipulator's greatest weakness is that their mask cannot be worn perfectly at all times. Sooner or later, the cracks appear. They may smile, but their eyes betray envy. They may speak of loyalty, but their actions reveal selfishness. They may claim humility, but their hunger for recognition cannot be concealed for long. Do not focus merely on what they say. Focus on what they do when they think no one is watching. Listen not only to their words, but to their silences. Pay attention to how they treat those they cannot gain from, for there lies the truth of their character. You must become as a hawk circling high above the battlefield, watching not with passion but with cold detachment. Most men rush into relationships with open hearts, desperate to trust, eager to connect. But trust is the currency manipulators exploit most effectively. They thrive on your eagerness to believe in them. Therefore, you must deny them this advantage. Never give away trust cheaply. Never hand over your loyalty without first testing its worth. Observe how they respond to denial. Watch how they react when their charm does not immediately ensnare you. The true face often emerges when the mask begins to fail. Understand this: manipulators are not merely liars. A liar speaks a falsehood once, and the deception ends when truth is revealed. But the manipulator is an artist of lies, weaving entire worlds of illusion, each more convincing than the last. Their deception is not a single act, but a performance designed to reshape your very perception of reality. They will gaslight you into doubting your own judgment. They will flood you with flattery until your guard is lowered. They will exploit guilt as though it were a chain fastened around your neck. And yet, if you recognize the mask early enough, their performance collapses. A king who sees the jester's costume beneath the cloak cannot be fooled into bowing before him. Think of history's rulers who failed to discern the mask. Kings have fallen because they mistook flattery for loyalty. Generals have been betrayed because they believed the false humility of their subordinates. Even nations have collapsed because they trusted smiling envoys whose true intent was conquest. The manipulator does not need armies to overthrow you, they need only your blindness. But you, if you learn to sharpen your sight, can pierce through their disguises before they strike. To achieve this, you must train your mind to separate appearance from essence. Ask yourself always, what does this person gain from me? What lies behind their kindness? What motive fuels their words? Do not assume purity of intention, for men are rarely pure. Approach every charm with suspicion, every compliment with calculation, and every plea for sympathy with analysis. This does not mean you live in paranoia, but rather that you live in awareness. For only the aware can resist being puppets. Remember, the manipulator thrives because most people are blinded by their own needs. The weak crave validation, so they fall for flattery. The overly kind crave purpose, so they are seduced by sob stories. The ambitious crave alliances, so they are fooled by false loyalty. To outsmart the manipulator, you must purge yourself of these weaknesses. You must no longer crave their words, no longer hunger for their approval, no longer need their recognition. When you are whole within yourself, the mask loses its power. And so, the first genius lies in sight. To recognize the mask is to strip the manipulator of their greatest weapon, invisibility. Once seen, they can no longer operate in shadows. Once unmasked, they lose the advantage of surprise. And though they may try to tighten their grip, you will no longer be the prey they imagined, for you now see them for what they truly are. The manipulator's blade is not forged of steel, but of emotions. They do not conquer through force, but through the silent pulling of invisible strings tied to your heart and mind. Their craft is subtle, their strike invisible, and their most favored weapon is your own reaction. A man who cannot master his emotions is as defenseless as a soldier who marches into war without a shield. Anger, fear, guilt, desperation. These are the instruments upon which the manipulator plays his music, and those who cannot silence their own storms will always dance to someone else's tune. Imagine the manipulator as a fisherman casting bait into the waters. Each bait is designed to lure a different kind of prey. Perhaps it is an insult meant to spark your anger, or a guilt-laden sigh intended to make you feel responsible, or a sudden silence designed to ignite your insecurity. The weak man, unable to resist, bites instantly, and in doing so, places the hook in his own mouth. The manipulator does not drag him down. He leaps willingly into the net. Yet the one who remains calm, who sees the bait for what it is, denies the fisherman his prize. This calmness, this detachment, is the fortress that renders you untouchable. Consider how easily crowds can be swayed. A whisper of fear spreads like fire. A drop of anger poisons the well of reason. Politicians, tyrants, and schemers alike have long understood this truth. Control the emotions of the masses, and you control their destiny. But the wise ruler, the one who rises above manipulation, is the man who first learns to control himself. For no empire can be governed without discipline, and no man can resist manipulation if he cannot govern his own passions. Ask yourself, how often have you been provoked into defending yourself, only to realize later that the provocation was deliberate? How often have you felt guilt for things you did not cause, simply because someone knew how to press that wound? How often have you rushed to explain, to justify, to apologize, when silence would have been the deadliest weapon? Each time you surrendered not to truth but to emotional bait. Each time you allowed the manipulator to write the script while you played the role of their obedient actor. The art of strategic detachment is not the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of it. You are not a stone unfeeling and lifeless. Rather, you are a fire contained within iron walls, burning but never spilling over. The manipulator may insult you, but you will not grant them the satisfaction of a reaction. They may attempt to guilt you, but you will not bend beneath their weight. They may attempt to provoke your rage, but you will smile with cold calmness, denying them the victory they crave. In this silence, in this composure, you seize control of the battlefield. Think of the courtroom where two advocates battle for influence. One grows emotional, raising his voice, his anger turning his words into weapons without precision. The other remains calm, measured, dissecting every point with clarity and control. Who do you believe holds the true power? The loud man appears strong, but his passion blinds him. The calm man appears unshakable, and therefore his words strike deeper. The manipulator always wants you to be the loud one, the reactive one, because once you lose composure, you lose credibility. But if you remain detached, if you master the silence between words, you force them into the role of the desperate performer. To achieve this mastery, you must learn to delay your responses. When a manipulator provokes you, do not answer immediately. Let the silence hang, let them grow uncertain, let their own scheme recoil upon them. A single moment of pause, a single breath of detachment, robs them of the satisfaction of control. They expect you to fight, to defend, to react. But when you do not, the mask slips from their face, for they realize they no longer pull the strings. Do not misunderstand. This discipline requires strength greater than that of any soldier. It is easier to charge into battle with sword in hand than it is to stand still while a manipulator scratches at your pride. The weak man must always respond, always explain, always prove himself. But the strong man knows that dignity does not need to shout, and truth does not need to beg. He understands that every emotional reaction is a gift to the manipulator, a gift they will use to tighten their control. Therefore, he refuses to give it. Think of water flowing in a river. Strike it with your hand and it does not shatter. It bends, it flows, it refuses to resist in the way you expect, and in this refusal lies its strength. The manipulator wants resistance, wants drama, wants chaos, because that is where they thrive. But if you give them nothing, if you remain still, calm, and untouchable, their claws find no flesh to grip. They rage, but they rage into emptiness, and emptiness cannot be defeated. And so detachment becomes not merely a shield, but a weapon. The manipulator seeks to draw you into their theater, to make you a character in their play. Yet by refusing to act, by refusing to be provoked, you turn their play into a farce. They stand on stage performing to silence, their tricks exposed, their influence dissolved. The one who controls his emotions not only denies manipulation, he reverses it, for nothing frustrates the deceiver more than an audience that will not clap. Seppo, the manipulator believes himself to be the chess master, moving pawns while you remain unaware of the game being played. But what if the pawn suddenly learned the rules? What if the prey studied the hunter and turned his weapons back upon him? To truly outsmart a manipulator, you must do more than resist, you must reverse. Their tactics, their tricks, their subtle strategies must be mirrored, twisted, and used against them until they find themselves caught in their own web. Every manipulator thrives on asymmetry. They know more about your emotions than you know about theirs. They push you into defense while they remain in control of the offense. But the moment you recognize their play, you shift the balance. When you reflect their methods, when you give them their own medicine, you expose their hypocrisy and destabilize their confidence. The spider becomes entangled in its own web, struggling against the very traps it once laid for you. Consider guilt one of the manipulator's favorite tools. They will sigh heavily, remind you of what you have not done for them, twist your sense of duty until you bend beneath its weight. But imagine turning guilt back upon them, calmly reminding them of promises they failed to keep, of responsibilities they neglected, of favors they once accepted but never repaid. The manipulator is skilled at chaining others with guilt, but when the chain is clasped around their own neck, they choke. Their tactic becomes their undoing. Or consider flattery. They will praise you with exaggerated sweetness, inflating your pride to weaken your guard. But if you mirror their flattery back at them, with words just as grand, just as hollow, you expose the artificiality of the game. You compliment them on matters trivial, exaggerating their smallest acts until they grow uneasy. For the manipulator knows his own flattery is false, and when it is reflected, he recognizes the mockery. The charm he once wielded as a weapon now cuts against his own skin. Another common device is provocation. They will insult you subtly, undermine you, plant seeds of doubt, hoping you will lash out in anger so they can play the role of the calm victim. Yet if you respond not with rage, but with a quiet mirror of their words, you reverse the trap. When they call you selfish, you remind them gently of times they placed themselves above others. When they accuse you of ingratitude, you calmly recount your own sacrifices for them. Their provocation fails, and instead, it is they who stand exposed as petty and defensive. The stage they built for your downfall becomes the platform for their own humiliation. You see, reversal is not about cruelty for its own sake. It is about balance. Manipulators thrive because most people do not fight back in their own language. They rely on the assumption that you will either obey or resist in predictable ways. But when you use their own tricks, you rob them of the certainty they depend upon. They cannot play the same games against themselves, for they know their own weaknesses too well. In this way, you force them into the light, where their shadows cannot protect them. Think of the cunning diplomat who lies at the negotiation table, concealing his true demands behind polite language. If you respond with honesty, he will consume you. But if you answer with his own method, subtle words hiding deeper truths, you disorient him. He begins to question whether you see through his game, whether he is being outplayed. In his doubt, his power weakens. The manipulator's greatest fear is not rejection, it is being beaten at his own craft. When you mirror his tactics, you hold a mirror before his soul and he does not like what he sees. Understand this, you need not always act upon the reversal. Sometimes, the mere suggestion that you could use their tactics unsettles them. A pause, a knowing smile, a carefully chosen phrase that reveals you have seen through their trick. This alone can destabilize the manipulator. They thrive on secrecy, on the illusion that their schemes are invisible. When you show them that they are seen, and worse, that you are capable of reflecting their methods, their mask trembles, their confidence falters, and their control diminishes. Yet you must be precise. To reflect a manipulator's tactics requires discipline and timing. Strike too early, and they will deny their intent. Strike too late, and the damage may already be done. The master strategist waits, gathers proof, studies the rhythm of the manipulator's play, and only then strikes with mirrored precision. This is not about reckless retaliation. It is about calculated reversal. Just as a general waits for the enemy to overextend before launching the counterattack, so too must you wait until the manipulator's trick leaves them vulnerable to their own design. There is a deeper truth here. By using their tactics, you reveal to yourself the simplicity of their power. Manipulators appear terrifying when their games are unknown, but once you wield their weapons, you realize how fragile they are. Their strength lies only in your ignorance. Once you reflect their schemes, you see how predictable, how desperate, how hollow their methods truly are. And in that revelation, you gain not only victory over them, but mastery over yourself. For the one who learns to turn tactics against their source becomes untouchable. He ceases to be prey and becomes hunter. He ceases to be puppet and becomes master of strings. And the manipulator, once so confident in his schemes, finds himself disarmed by the very tools he trusted most. The manipulator thrives only where weakness exists. They are parasites feeding on insecurity, on desperation, on the absence of self-command. A man who knows not his own strength becomes the perfect host for the schemes of others. but a man who builds power within himself. Power that is silent, invisible yet undeniable, cannot be touched. To outsmart manipulators, you must not merely resist their games, nor only reflect them. You must become a fortress so impenetrable that their efforts collapse before they begin. True power is not the roar of the lion that everyone hears. It is the quiet presence that makes others hesitate before they even dare to strike. It is not always displayed, but always felt. And this kind of power begins with awareness. When you know your worth, when you have examined your own fears and desires and chained them under discipline, the manipulator loses his hooks. He cannot guilt you, for you no longer bend under the weight of false obligations. He cannot flatter you, for you are not desperate for empty validation. He cannot provoke you, for your pride no longer leaps at every insult. The man who governs himself cannot be governed by another. Building invisible power means cultivating silence as a weapon. Words are often the manipulator's battlefield. They trap you in conversations, they twist your speech, they lure you into explaining, justifying, defending. But silence, calm, deliberate silence, robs them of the terrain. It denies them the reaction they need. When you choose your words sparingly, when you refuse to be pulled into endless explanations, you establish an aura of control. The manipulator, expecting easy prey, suddenly finds himself facing a wall of stone, unmovable and unraidable. Yet silence alone is not enough. Invisible power must also be reinforced by boundaries. The manipulator thrives when your lines are unclear, when they can inch past your defenses one favor at a time, one concession at a time, until they own you completely. But a man with unshakable boundaries cannot be so easily invaded. When you say no, you mean no, and you do not shiver with guilt or hesitate with apologies. When you allow access, it is deliberate, calculated, and never naïve. Boundaries are the walls of your fortress, and the manipulator is powerless before a wall that does not crumble. Think of the ruler in his court. He does not explain himself to every whispering servant, nor does he justify his decisions to every critic. His strength lies in his distance, his mystery, his refusal to be drawn into petty disputes. The manipulator craves proximity, because closeness breeds influence. But if you maintain a certain distance, measured, deliberate, they cannot enter your inner circle. They see you, but they do not touch you. They speak, but their words fall upon stone. This is invisible power, the authority that does not shout, yet commands respect without effort. Another pillar of this unseen strength is the cultivation of independence. The manipulator preys most effectively on dependency. If you rely on them for approval, for resources, for connections, they have leverage. But the independent man, the one who has built his own networks, his own self-sufficiency, his own sense of worth, leaves them with nothing to exploit. The king who owes nothing to his courtiers cannot be manipulated by them. The man who stands complete in himself is a puzzle the manipulator cannot solve. Consider also the power of patience. The manipulator is impatient, he thrives on quick reactions, quick victories, quick control. But if you are patient, if you refuse to be rushed, their urgency becomes their downfall. They push, you do not move. They prod, you remain calm. They attempt to escalate, and you delay with stillness. In time, they reveal themselves more clearly, exposing their hunger, their tricks, their desperation. And while they unravel, your invisible power only grows stronger. Invisible power is not about theatrics. It is not about announcing your strength to the world. It is about cultivating such command over yourself that others feel it, even in your silence. It is about crafting an aura so steady that manipulators hesitate before even attempting their schemes. They sense that you are not like the rest, that you are not easily swayed, not easily provoked, not easily deceived. They sense that their usual weapons will shatter against you, and so, often, they retreat before they even strike. History is filled with examples of this kind of quiet dominance. The rulers who lasted longest were not those who fought every battle with noise and fury, but those who inspired fear and respect through their presence alone. They did not need to expose every trick, nor dismantle every scheme. Their invisible power, their self-command, their discipline, their aura, made conspirators falter before their plans could even be set in motion. Such rulers could sit in silence, and yet the room bent to their will. That is the kind of strength you must cultivate. For the manipulator's greatest advantage is that most people are fragile, predictable, and desperate. But when you become whole, when you build power within yourself that does not need to be displayed but only carried, you remove yourself from their reach. You no longer fight their games, for their games cannot touch you. You no longer fear their influence, for their influence cannot penetrate your fortress. And in that moment, the manipulator, who once believed himself the master of strings, finds his hands empty, his tricks useless, his presence insignificant before yours.